Emily Taylor is the CEO of Oxford Information Labs and an expert in international security at the think tank Chatham House, and joins us now. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning, Stig.
The revelations in this story, they cover 4 years of cyber attacks emanating from the Russian state. What's the most striking thing about this story to you?
There are several aspects of the story, and October seems to be the moment where the US and other allies stand up and denounce Russia for cyber attacks. We had this last year on a fairly small scale, but also, I don't know if you remember, 2 years ago, a number of NATO allies stood up against Russia. The main thing is, in cyberspace, it's difficult to do attribution properly, but these are real headline cyber attacks, NotPetya. We were all talking about that, the hacks of the French elections, intrusions into the Olympics, and also all of the interference around the Skripal's poisoning. This is a very, very detailed indictment from the US, and at the same time, the UK is standing up. So what we're seeing is attribution used as a strategic response to these, to name and shame bad actors in cyberspace, allies standing together, and also putting information into the public domain which would otherwise be classified, and exposing their own capabilities in the cyber arena.
So why have they done that? Why is they made such a big splash of this, do you think?
Partly it's been going on for a number of years because there is a real problem. Russia, other countries are behaving very badly in cyberspace, and the US indictment calls out, just from 3 companies, $1 billion of losses as a result of NotPetya. So there's real damage. We had power outages in the Ukraine and so on. But what is the cost to Russia and other countries of doing this sort of activity? Very little. So it's one attempt to say, well, we as countries are going to call out bad actors to make sure that they are named and shamed, and sort of slightly raise the cost, if you like, of this kind of activity in the international arena.
Is there a petulance about this activity? I mean, there's a couple of things that strike me. The fact that they pretended to be Chinese and North Korean actors, which seems a striking move in itself. But the petulance of saying, we've been banned from the Olympics, so we're going to ruin it for the rest of the world.
Yes, and there's also, there's an awful lot of significance throughout these attacks. If you take the Ukraine power outages, the day that they were, the NotPetya, the day that they were triggered coincides with the day that Ukraine became independent with the Soviet Union. The Office for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons was attacked as a result of the use of Novichok on British soil. So these are very strategic targets, often triggered at strategically important goals. And as you say, banned from the Olympics for doping. So what do the Russians, what are they alleged to do? They're alleged to hack anti-doping agencies. And a couple of years ago, they were accused of also, doing similar activity around their bans in the Olympics.
What do we know about Unit 74455 of Russia's GRU military intelligence agency? How sophisticated is the GRU? Because they're, at one level you see them and sometimes they're named, and even in this we're talking about, it sounds a bit petulant. Like I said, it doesn't sound very strategic. It sounds more personal. Are these a very sophisticated intelligence agency?
Well, the GRU, this is not the first time that members of the GRU have been indicted by the United States. And you do see shades of personalities and colours. One of the GRU agents, it's alleged in the US indictment, was also doing a bit of a sideline of doing ransomware attacks and other phishing attacks on Russian victims, which, the Russian state, the general received wisdom is the Russian state would tolerate that sort of criminal activity, but not against its own. So you do get this sort of blend of criminal activity, it's alleged, with that state-sponsored approach. And I think the thing that really comes through for me is the planning. For example, in the Ukrainian power outages in 2015 and 16, you see that the facilities were actually compromised several months before the kill switch was thrown. And so it's there's a lot of planning going in, there's a lot of human resources and capability, and whether or not the individuals have that capability, what we see is that it builds up over time, and if you have a strategic operation, you can catch people out.
Just finally, Emily, does this response by the US and the UK not also illustrate impotence? Because the US Justice Department issues a number of indictments, the UK comes out and talks tough, as it always does, about Russia. And yet the feeling we will all have, and people listening will have this morning, is that Russia will do this again, Russia will continue to do it. There never seems to ever be a check when a Russian outrage is exposed.
I think that's part of the frustration. You're quite right. There's also the irony that Russia in the United Nations is pushing very hard for an international cyber treaty and to set the rules of the road for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. So there's all sorts of frustrations around this kind of behavior, and I think the West is searching for a way to raise the cost of this kind of activity, because as you say, at the moment, you list down, these are some of the most prominent and destructive cyber attacks that we've seen in the last 5 years, and it seems to be the same small unit responsible for all of them, often using Western infrastructure like domain names, servers, social media accounts. And so I think that there is a role that industry can continue to play by making sure that their services are not used and abused by foreign adversaries. Difficult stuff, though.